I'm Dr. Duke with The New American, and the story of the century, the new century, still seems to be impeachment of Donald Trump. And it's an interesting story, and many people have talked about it from many angles, and there are many ways to investigate this story. But it seems to me utterly, utterly hypocritical in a way that needs foregrounding. That in order to protect the Constitution, says the hypocritical progressive left, we have to rend, contort, and violate the Constitution to go after this president. The fact remains, and I think anybody who's paying attention knows this, if the case the Democrats are putting forward was as airtight as they say it is, if they have evidence that constitutional level violations have occurred, if high crimes and misdemeanors are indeed what Donald Trump has engaged in, then you would not have to engage in extra constitutional procedures to come after him. The evidence should speak for itself. The evidence and the witnesses and the people who've compiled this evidence, the so-called evidence, they should be as transparent as possible. If what the Democrat rhetoric tells us is that this is a slam dunk, no-brainer for impeachment, then why is it that the progressives refuse to allow witnesses? Why is it that the progressives will not provide due process, which is one of the due process? It is one of the 3 or 4 most important rights that we are guaranteed in the founding documents. And yet, when it comes to something as significant as prosecuting, impeaching a sitting president of the United States, a duly elected president of the United States, to deny him due process is as major a violation as you can imagine. We've seen before how progressive socialists have wanted to stifle free speech in defending free speech. We have seen how progressive hypocrites have wanted to fight fascism by engaging in fascist tactics, right? By screaming down free speech conservative speakers on college campuses, by taking to the streets to violently protest fascism with bricks and sticks and stones. We're used to that in America. But this, at the highest stage, this is no longer anymore a simple campus riot. It's no longer anymore just a foolish anti-First Amendment screed from the New York Times. This is an attempt, a clear attempt, to compile a case against Donald Trump in secrecy. They've done it by more or less excluding Republicans from participating in the process. They have hidden from us the very name of the so-called whistleblower. When did we reach the point where somebody who has, to the degree we know who this is, somebody has these kinds of odd ties to Democrat fundraisers, to Democrat operatives, to the former vice president of the United States, who's now Joe Biden, now running for president himself? When did the idea that somebody who comes forth with information that may or may not lead to impeachment must be protected from the consequences of that information? When did we as a country decide? Because I don't find it anywhere in the founding documents. I do not find this anywhere in the Constitution or the Declaration. The idea that you could make these kinds of complaints, these kinds of allegations against the president, and then be protected from having your name known, be protected from having to testify, being protected for having to be cross-examined. This is, as we know, the antithesis of due process. It is undue lack of process. It is much more unconstitutional than anything I have seen the president yet be accused of. And the president himself has made this case. Republican senators and lawmakers have made this case. Lindsey Graham, I think, said it about right. If you're not going to allow a sitting president of the United States to confront his accuser, to see all of the evidence, to call his own witnesses, then this must be dead on arrival at the U.S. Senate. And I think to some degree, that's what our cynical Democrats are plotting for. They clearly know that the Senate is not able to render a verdict on this case without having seen the full evidence, without being able to make these inquiries. When this comes out of the Congress, and let's assume the verdict here is to impeach, then there's no honorable legal or even legal way that the Senate can take this up. Now, Senate Democrats will push for it, and Senate Republicans will have to hold the line. We'll see if we can trust that or not. But this is very cynical in the sense that once it comes out of the House with almost no Republican, not just no Republican votes, no Republican participation or even access on the part of Republican congressmen to see much of this information, to challenge any of these witnesses, to bring the accusers to the dock so they can be questioned. Without all of that, this will go to the Senate. And then what's going to happen is a major minority of Democrat senators will put pressure on the Republicans. Regardless of how this was done, regardless of how due process was denied in unconstitutional ways, they're going to push the Republicans to go ahead and investigate and then decide this anyway. And then you're going to get people like Mitt Romney, right, who already has signaled to us that his loyalty to the Constitution and to President Trump is subordinate to his desire for popularity, a la John McCain. This is a dangerous gambit that the liberal progressives are playing. They're going to force this through in a complete deaffirmation of due process rights. And then they're going to pressure Republican senators to do this regardless of what they know is right. And then when Republicans, and I think they will, ultimately, when the Republican majority does refuse either to engage this or to allow it to proceed the way the Democrats allowed it to proceed in the Congress, then they're going to blame them for obstructionism, for rewriting the rules, for endangering whistleblowers, the whole cant that you know is coming down the road. This, my friends, is impeachable. What the Democrat congressmen are doing is actually impeachable constitutionally, if you think about it. If you think about the way they've handled this, you think about the cynicism and the disrespect for our open legal system of handling these kind of cases, the stripping of a president of the right to respond directly to his accusers, to Republicans to see the information, see the so-called evidence that would allow them to craft a case, to refuse to allow the Democrats, the Republicans, to speak to people like Joe Biden himself or Hunter Biden, right? And to be able to sneer and snicker at requests from legitimate Republican lawmakers to access and to respond to this. These are impeachable offenses. So the great irony to me is that we have created a system where literally now impeachment has become a tool, a partisan tool used to go after political enemies, to try to undo legitimate elections. On so many fronts, you can think about this. On so many fronts, what the Democrats are doing is almost, I like to think, something that maybe even the RICO Act could address, right? This is racketeering at the highest level. It's rigged. It is a system. It is a process, the way the Democrats have handled it, that is untenable with freedom. We think about where we sit now today, and you have a duly elected president who in just 9-10 months is going to have to come up for re-election, roughly a year. It's going to have to come up for re-election. What is the purpose of this now strategically? What does this accomplish? Because by the time this entire process had wended its way all the way through the constitutional alleys and channels that it has to go, we're going to be right on the verge of the election anyway. And there I think you have your answer. It's not about justice. It's not about truth. It is certainly not about upholding the Constitution of the United States. And I think you understand, as I do, that it's been quite a long time since the progressive wing of the Democrat Party, who's in charge of these investigations, has had any real regard for the Constitution. It is funny, isn't it, to hear them scream that Donald Trump has abused the Constitution without much evidence, and that we progressive Democrats who want to see the Second Amendment done away with, who want to see the First Amendment amended to get rid of certain kinds of speech we call hate speech, to at every level take the Constitution and remake it. We are in the middle of a huge push for a constitutional convention that will not further the aims of the Constitution, but will undermine it. And it is primarily Democrat politicians, with the help of some Republicans, who are pushing for this kind of constitutional rewrite. The idea that our Democrats and our progressives hold in value the American Constitution is so demonstrably untrue. In their actions, in their speeches, in what they're trying to do legislatively, it is precisely the Constitution that these Democrats want to do away with. And now it is terribly galling and frustrating that under the guise of constitutional protectionism, they have to go after this president. It is transparent. And it is transparent even if you watch mainstream media. It is transparent even if you read the New York Times, that what they're doing here is constitutionally problematic in much greater ways than anything they can accuse the president of. And that's why I believe in the long run, this is going to be a disaster for Democrats. Thank you again for joining us. I'm Dr. Duke with the New American Magazine, and this has been my take on today's news.